There's a truth about human development that Abraham Maslow discovered decades ago, and that most people still haven't fully grasped. The most developed people, those Maslow called self-actualized, spend significantly more time alone than average. And this is neither a coincidence nor a sign of a problem. It's actually a fundamental characteristic of higher psychological development. If you felt a growing need to be alone, to refuse social invitations without guilt, to protect your time at home as if it were your most valuable asset, then what I'm about to reveal will completely transform how you perceive this need, because being alone isn't what you've been taught it to be. It's not social isolation or fear of connection. It's actually a sign that you're climbing Maslow's pyramid toward higher levels of human development. I'm not saying this just as motivational theory. Maslow's research on self-actualized personalities consistently showed that these people not only tolerated solitude, they actively sought it, protected it, and considered it essential to their functioning. Maslow observed that self-actualized individuals demonstrated a remarkable ability to enjoy solitude and privacy to a greater degree than the average person. Not because they were incapable of relating to others, but because they had transcended the neurotic need for constant approval from others. And that changes everything. Because it means that your need to be alone is not regression, it's evolution. It's not you going back in human development. It's you advancing to stages that most people will never reach. So subscribe to this channel now and activate the bell, because we are going to explore together the secrets of human development that can elevate your life to a completely new level of fulfillment and authenticity. Leave your like on this video, because this content needs to reach more people who are seeking this genuine transformation. Before we continue, I need you to stop for a moment and reflect on something profound. When was the last time you felt that exhausted feeling after a social event? That tiredness that has nothing to do with physical exertion, but with having to maintain an edited version of yourself for hours on end? Write in the comments right now the phrase, "I'm tired of pretending," and see how many other people here feel exactly the same as you. Your sincerity in the comments can be the trigger that another person needs to understand that they are not alone on this journey. So don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because your vulnerability helps create a community of people who are truly seeking authenticity. Let me explain exactly what happens when a person starts to climb the levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and why solitude becomes not only acceptable, but absolutely necessary. Maslow structured human development in layers, starting with basic physiological needs like food and shelter, then safety, then belonging and love, then esteem, and finally at the top, self-actualization. But what most people don't realize is that each level demands something different from you. And when you reach the higher levels, especially esteem and self-actualization, the social dynamic changes radically. At the lower levels of the pyramid, belonging and love, you need others in a very concrete way. You need to be accepted by the group. You need external validation. You need to feel that you are part of something bigger than yourself. And this is completely normal and healthy at these stages of development. The problem is that the whole society is structured to keep people trapped at these intermediate levels, trapped in the perpetual need for approval, validation, and belonging at any cost. Because people who need external validation are predictable, controllable, and voracious consumers of products and experiences that promise social acceptance. But when you genuinely start to satisfy these needs for belonging and love, when you develop real and meaningful relationships, something interesting happens. You naturally begin to move to the next level, the level of esteem. And here things change completely. Esteem, in Maslow's conception, has two components. Esteem that comes from others, external respect and recognition and self-esteem, self-respect based on competence and real autonomy. It is in this transition that most people get stuck. Because satisfying the esteem that comes from others still keeps you dependent on external audiences. You still need an audience. You still need applause. You are still performing, but genuine self-esteem, the kind based on knowing who you are and trusting in your own competence, doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't require external approval. It exists independently of how many people are paying attention. And it is precisely here that the need for solitude begins to emerge strongly. Maslow realized that self-actualized people, those who had satisfied all their previous needs and were living from growth motivations rather than deficiency motivations, shared specific characteristics. And one of the most striking was what he called detachment, or the need for privacy. These people were neither misanthropic nor antisocial. They simply did not need constant social interaction to feel complete. They had developed such a strong, stable inner center that they could function perfectly well alone for extended periods. Furthermore, Maslow observed that these people often preferred solitude at crucial moments. Moments of important decisions, deep reflection, creative work. Because they had discovered something most never do, that the presence of others, even loved ones, creates a field of influence that inevitably distorts their internal processes. Think for a moment about how this works in practice. When you are truly alone, without your phone ringing, without notifications, without the possibility of someone interrupting your thoughts, what happens to your mind? Initially, there is discomfort. There is restlessness. All those years of social conditioning, screaming that you should be doing something, connecting with someone, being visibly productive. But if you resist that initial impulse, if you remain in solitude without distractions, something profound begins to emerge. Your own thoughts. Not the thoughts you learned to think, not the opinions you absorbed from the culture around you, but your real thoughts, your genuine questions, your authentic desires. And this is simultaneously liberating and frightening because you begin to realize how much of yourself was being suppressed to conform to the expectations of others. Maslow had a fascinating concept he called deficiency motivation versus growth motivation. And understanding this is absolutely crucial to understanding why developed people seek more solitude. Motivation by deficiency is when you act to fill a void. When you seek relationships because you feel incomplete alone. When you seek approval because you doubt your own worth. When you keep yourself constantly busy because silence reveals an inner emptiness you don't want to face. This is the motivation that dominates the lower levels of the pyramid. And there's nothing wrong with it at these stages. It's necessary and appropriate when you're building the foundations of your development. But motivation by growth is completely different. It's when you act not because you need to fill something that's missing, but because you're expressing something that already exists in abundance within you. It's creating, not because you need validation, but because the creation itself fulfills you. It's relating not because you're afraid of being alone, but because you genuinely appreciate the specific company of that person. It's seeking knowledge not to impress anyone, but because curiosity itself is rewarding. And here's the crucial point. People operating from motivation by growth don't need a constant audience. They don't need external validation for every step they take because the reward is intrinsic. It comes from within. And this completely changes their relationship with solitude. For a person operating from deficiency motivation, being alone is threatening because it reveals the void they are trying to fill. But for a person operating on growth motivation, being alone is energizing because it offers space for the authentic expression of the self without the distortions that the presence of others inevitably introduces. Maslow extensively studied people he considered self-actualized, figures like Einstein, Eleanor Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln. and he found consistent patterns. These people demonstrated remarkable autonomy, not in the sense of being selfish or indifferent to others, but in the sense of having a strong enough inner center not to be easily influenced by social pressures or cultural fads. They could disagree with the majority without anxiety. They could follow their own judgment, even when everyone around them thought differently. They could stand alone with their decisions without needing group consensus to feel secure. And this is not stubbornness or arrogance. It's the natural result of having developed a genuine self instead of a self constructed entirely from external expectations. When you know who you are, when you trust your own processes of perception and judgment, you simply don't need to consult the group at every moment to know if you're on the right track. Another fascinating aspect that Maslow observed in these self-actualized personalities was what he called democratic quality of character. They could learn from anyone regardless of social status. They could see value in all human beings. But, and this is important, they were also highly selective about who they spent time with in a close and intimate way. Self-actualized people generally had a few very close friends instead of many superficial friends. They preferred depth to breadth in relationships, and this naturally resulted in spending less time socializing broadly and more time either alone or with those few people with whom genuine connection was possible. It's not that they despised others. It's that they had transcended the neurotic need to be loved by everyone. They were comfortable being deeply appreciated by a few rather than superficially by many. Now I want to talk about something Maslow observed that is absolutely crucial, but that almost no one openly discusses: the relationship between psychological development and the capacity to tolerate peak experiences. Maslow coined the term peak experiences to describe those moments of heightened intensity where you feel a deep connection with something greater than yourself. Moments of extreme clarity, overwhelming beauty, sudden understanding, joy that seems to overflow from within. And he noted that self-actualized people not only had these experiences more frequently, they were also more open to them, more receptive, less frightened by them. And here's the connection with solitude. These peak experiences almost always happen in moments of quiet, in moments where you are present with yourself without the distractions of the social world. Could be walking alone in nature. It could be immersed in creative work. It could be in meditation or silent contemplation. But it rarely happens amidst superficial conversations or performative social obligations. Solitude creates the space where these experiences become possible. And people at the highest levels of development have learned this. They protect their solitude because they know that's where the most significant moments of existence tend to emerge, where the authentic self can reveal itself without interference, where you can experience what Maslow called being cognition, a form of perception unfiltered by the needs of the ego, undistorted by social anxiety, non-performative. And this type of perception is simply not accessible when you are constantly in social mode, constantly monitoring how you are being perceived, constantly adjusting your presentation to fit the expectations of the environment. You can't see clearly when half your attention is focused on managing impressions. Maslow also spoke about something he called being love. In contrast to deficiency-love. Deficiency love is when you need the other person to feel complete. When you love because you're afraid of being alone. When you cling to the relationship because it fills voids you can't fill on your own. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. At certain stages of development, we all start out that way, needing others in a very concrete and urgent way. But being love is different. It's when you love the other person for who they are, not for what they do for you. When you appreciate their existence without needing to possess or control them. When you can love without neurotic dependence And people who love in this way can be alone without it threatening their relationships. Because their love isn't based on desperate need, but on genuine appreciation. They don't need the constant physical presence of another to feel loved. They can carry love internally and access it even in absence. This means they can choose solitude without it, signifying rejection or abandonment by those they love. They simply recognize that there are times when being alone is necessary to maintain self-integrity. And they honor this need without guilt. There's another aspect of Maslow's thinking that is absolutely essential to understanding the relationship between development and solitude. The idea that self-actualized people are less NCULTUR. This means they are not completely molded by the specific culture in which they grew up. They can see through cultural conditioning, question norms that most accept without thinking, and create their own values instead of simply absorbing the prevailing values around them. This inevitably creates a certain distance between these people and mainstream culture. Not a hostile or superior distance, but a natural distance that comes from not being fully immersed in the current, from being able to stay on the sidelines and observe, instead of being automatically carried along. And when you develop this ability to see through culture, to question dominant narratives, to recognize that much of what you've been taught about how to live was arbitrary or even harmful, you naturally spend less time in spaces where these unquestioned narratives dominate. You tire of conversations that simply recycle pre-programmed opinions. You lose interest in social events that are essentially rituals of conformity, and you seek more time alone where you can think your own thoughts without the constant burden of having to translate everything into socially acceptable language. This doesn't make you better than others. It makes you different. And being different, even silently and unassumingly, creates a natural need for more personal space, more time away from the social stage. Maslow had a wonderful observation. He said that self-actualized people are simultaneously more individual and more social. More individual in the sense of being more authentic, more unique, less copies of cultural templates, but also more social in the sense of feeling a deep connection with all of humanity, an identification with the human species as a whole that transcends narrow tribal loyalties. And this apparent contradiction makes perfect sense when you understand the dynamic. Because when you don't need the small group for constant validation, you are free to feel connected to the larger group, to all of humanity, without fear that being alone means being isolated. You can be physically alone for long periods and still feel deeply connected to something greater, because the connection no longer depends on physical proximity or constant interaction. It comes from an inner feeling of belonging to existence itself. Let's talk now about something Maslow observed that people often misinterpret. The resistance of self-actualized people to blind conformity doesn't mean they are rebellious by nature or that they enjoy confrontation. In fact, Maslow noted that these people were often seen as conventional on the surface. They didn't seek to shock or challenge others unnecessarily. They simply didn't internalize rules that didn't make sense to them. And this is a crucial distinction. People in the intermediate stages of development often express their individuality through visible rebellion, through dramatically confronting social norms, because they still need the validation of being seen as different. But truly self-actualized people don't need to prove anything. They simply are who they are. And if that aligns with social norms, that's fine. If not, that's fine too. The point isn't about impressing anyone with their nonconformity. It's about living from their own center. And this creates an extraordinary freedom. The freedom to choose solitude or company based on genuine need rather than in reaction against expectations. You don't stay alone to prove a point. You stay alone because at a certain moment, that's simply what your being needs to function optimally. Maslow also spoke about what he called efficient perception of reality, self-actualized. People are better at seeing things as they are, instead of how they want them to be or how they fear they will be. They have fewer psychological defenses distorting their perception, less anxiety clouding their judgment, and they can tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty without needing to force premature conclusions. And again, here is the connection with solitude. This perceptual clarity is much easier to maintain when you are not constantly immersed in social environments where group pressure and conformity dynamics obscure what you are really seeing. When you spend time alone, you can check your perceptions against your own direct experience without the constant noise of others' opinions trying to convince you that you are seeing something different from what you are actually seeing. Think about how many times you've had a clear perception of something or someone, but then, in a social context, allowed that perception to be diluted or denied because the group saw it differently. You begin to doubt your own judgment. You start to think that maybe you're wrong, and gradually your ability to trust your own perception atrophies. But when you secure regular time for solitude, time where you can process experiences without immediate interference, you keep that ability sharp. You learn to trust what you see, what you feel, what you know, even when it differs from the surrounding consensus. Maslow made a fascinating distinction between deficiency needs, those that need to be satisfied to avoid illness or discomfort, and growth needs, those that pull you toward the realization of potential and self-transcendence. And here's something profound. Solitude works differently depending on which type of need is active in you. If you are operating primarily from deficiency needs, forced solitude will be experienced as painful, as threatening, because you are genuinely dependent on others to satisfy basic needs for safety, belonging, and esteem. You need them concretely, and their absence creates real anxiety. But as these deficiency needs are met, as you build a solid foundation of security, belonging, and self-esteem, solitude begins to change in quality. It ceases to be threatening and begins to become nourishing. It begins to be the space where growth needs can be met. Needs for deeper understanding, for authentic creative expression, for self-transcendence. And here is the beautiful paradox. The more developed you become, the more you can be alone without feeling lonely. Because you are no longer alone in the sense of being deprived of something essential. You are alone in the sense of being fully present with yourself. And this self-presence is rich, complex, and interesting enough not to need constant distraction. Maslow used the term self-actualization tendency to describe development that happens not because you are trying to achieve something or impress someone, but simply because it is in the nature of healthy organisms to grow toward their full potential. Just as a seed doesn't need reasons to germinate. It simply germinates when the conditions are right, and consciously chosen solitude is one of the most important conditions for this type of growth. Because real growth requires you to stop reacting to the external environment long enough for genuine internal impulses to emerge and express themselves. When you are constantly in reactive mode, constantly responding to external demands, constantly playing roles for others, you simply don't have access to the deeper levels of yourself, those levels where real growth happens, where genuine insights emerge, where transformation becomes possible. Now, I need to talk about something that is both liberating and challenging to recognize. Maslow observed that the more you develop, the smaller the percentage of the population with whom you can relate on a deep level, not because you have become elitist or arrogant, but simply because you are operating from motivations and values that are less common. You are asking questions that most are not asking. You are interested in things that most consider irrelevant. You are living according to internal principles instead of following cultural scripts. And all of this inevitably creates distance. Maslow even acknowledged a form of loneliness that comes with self-actualization. The recognition that certain experiences and understandings simply cannot be shared with most people. Not because those people are inferior, but because they are at different stages of development dealing with different challenges. And accepting this reality without bitterness, without superiority, simply as a fact of the developmental journey, is part of mature self-actualization. You stop trying to make everyone understand you. You stop needing your choices to make sense to others. You simply live from your own center and deeply appreciate those rare moments and those rare people with whom genuine, mutual understanding is possible. But you don't depend on those moments to validate your existence. This is perhaps the deepest freedom. Not needing to be understood to feel valuable. Not needing witnesses to your most significant experiences. Not needing to translate everything into shareable language to trust that it was real. And this freedom only comes through significant time spent alone. Time developing a deep relationship with yourself. Because only when you truly know yourself, when you trust your own internal processes, when you know you are real, even without external validation, only then can you carry this existential solitude without it diminishing you. Maslow had a beautiful understanding of what he called healthy self-acceptance in contrast to narcissism. Narcissism is when you constantly need external admiration, because deep down you don't feel valuable. You build a grandiose image of yourself to compensate for feelings of inadequacy. And this image needs a constant audience. It needs perpetual validation because it is fragile. It is built on compensation rather than genuine self-worth. But healthy self-acceptance, the kind Maslow saw in self-actualized people, is completely different. That it's not based on comparison with others. It doesn't need to make you better than anyone else. It's simply a deep acceptance of who you are, including limitations and imperfections. And this acceptance makes you capable of being alone because you're not running away from yourself. You don't need constant distraction to avoid facing inner shame or emptiness. You genuinely enjoy your own company because you've made peace with yourself. And making peace with yourself is work that can only be done in solitude. No use having 1,000 people telling you that you're wonderful if you don't believe it yourself. External validation may provide temporary relief, but it never solves the fundamental issue of self-acceptance. That has to come from within. It has to come from you spending enough time with yourself to see through the layers of internalized self-criticism and shame, and find beneath it all a self that is fundamentally acceptable, fundamentally worthy, exactly as it is. And when you find that, when you truly internalize your own inherent worth, the need for external approval drops dramatically. It doesn't disappear completely, because we are social beings and will always care to some extent about how we are seen. But it ceases to be that urgent and desperate need. It becomes a preference instead of a vital necessity. There's an aspect of Maslow's work that is especially relevant today. The difference between pseudo-growth and genuine growth. Maslow realized that many people pursued things that seemed like development, but were actually just more sophisticated ways of satisfying deficiency needs. You accumulate achievements, not because you are expressing genuine potential, but because you need to prove your worth. You seek spiritual experiences, not because you are genuinely interested in transcendence, but because you want to feel special. You collect knowledge, not for the love of understanding, but to impress others with your sophistication. And solitude is the ultimate test here. Because in solitude, without an audience, without the possibility of impressing anyone, what remains? If you are genuinely interested in something, you will pursue it even alone, even without anyone knowing, even without receiving credit. But if your interest was primarily performative, it will fade in the absence of an audience. So people who spend significant time alone and remain engaged, continue creating, continue growing, are demonstrating that their development is genuine, stemming from intrinsic motivation rather than a need for validation. And this is one of the most profound gifts of consciously chosen solitude. It shows you what is real in you, what survives when there are no witnesses. And what survives is your authentic self, from where genuine growth can emerge. In his later work, Maslow became increasingly interested in what he called self-transcendence. Experiences where the individual self is transcended and you feel unity with something greater, be it nature, humanity, the cosmos, or the divine. He realized that these experiences were more common in self-actualized people, and perhaps represented levels beyond self-actualization. Moments where you completely transcend ego concerns and experience reality from an expanded perspective. And again, here is the profound connection with solitude. These experiences of transcendence almost always happen in moments of profound stillness. Moments where the constant chatter of the social mind finally silences and something vaster can emerge. You cannot transcend the self while you are busy maintaining the self, while you are performing identity, managing impressions, navigating social dynamics. The very act of being in social mode keeps you at the ego level, because that's what social interaction largely involves. Egos meeting and negotiating, but in profound solitude, especially after extended periods, the ego boundaries begin to soften. You stop identifying so rigidly with your personal history, your achievements, your characteristics, and something more fluid, more expansive becomes possible. And people who have regular access to these experiences through contemplative practices or simply through extended time spent in silence, these people will naturally seek more solitude because they know what becomes accessible there. They know that there are dimensions of human experience that only reveal themselves when you stop being someone and simply are . So what does all this mean for you watching now, who may have felt guilty for wanting to spend more time alone, who may have been criticized by friends or family for being too isolated, who may be wondering if there's something wrong with you for not wanting to participate in the same social activities that everyone around you seems to value. It means that you may simply be responding to a genuine developmental impulse, an impulse that is pulling you toward higher levels of human potential. And resisting that impulse because of guilt or social pressure may be actively hindering your evolution. Of course, it's important to be honest with yourself about motivation. If you're avoiding people because you're afraid, because you have untreated social anxiety, because you're depressed, then that's different. That requires attention and possibly professional help. Fear-based avoidance is not the same as a developmentally appropriate choice for solitude. But if you are genuinely well when alone, if you are productive, creative, at peace, if you have meaningful relationships, even if few, if you are not running away from something, but moving towards something, then trust that you know your own developmental needs better than anyone outside can. Trust that Maslow was right when he observed that highly developed people naturally seek more solitude, not as an escape, but as a necessary space for the flourishing of the authentic self. And when you trust that, when you stop apologizing for your needs, when you protect your alone time without guilt, something wonderful happens. You stop wasting energy trying to justify your existence and can use that energy to truly live, to truly grow, to truly become who you have the potential to be. Because ultimately, the self-actualization that Maslow described isn't something you achieve by following someone else's rules. It's not something that happens when you perfectly conform to social expectations. It's something that emerges when you finally stop betraying yourself. Stop fragmenting your energy trying to be all things to all people, and simply allow yourself to be whole, even if that wholeness is different from what everyone expected, even if that wholeness prefers more silence than most can tolerate, even if that wholeness needs solitude in the same way that others need constant company. And there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not failing at being human. you're possibly just further along the path of development than you realize. And your need for solitude is not a weakness. It's a sign of growth. It's evidence that you're becoming more fully yourself. Maslow spent decades studying the healthiest, most developed human beings he could find. And what he discovered was that these people, without exception, had learned to honor their need for solitude. They had learned to withdraw from society, not out of fear or hatred, but out of love. Love for truth, for authenticity, for their own development. They had learned that sometimes the most socially responsible thing you can do is to step away from society long enough to become genuinely yourself, because the world doesn't need more people conforming to expectations. It needs more people who have done the hard work of self-development, who have faced themselves honestly, who have integrated their shadows, who have discovered their authentic values, who have learned to live from their deepest truth. And that work, that sacred work of becoming fully human, requires solitude. Not forever, but regularly. Not as isolation, but as integration. Not as escape, but as essential development. So if you're feeling the pull to withdraw, to spend more time alone, to step back from social obligations that no longer serve your growth, Maslow would say, honor that pull. It's not antisocial. It's developmental. Your psyche knows what it needs. Your authentic self is calling you inward. And the most courageous thing you can do is to answer that call. Even if no one else understands. Even if society tells you you're wrong. Even if you have to disappoint others to honor yourself. Because in the end, the greatest contribution you can make to the world is to become fully yourself. And that journey, that beautiful, challenging journey of self-actualization, requires time alone. Time to think your own thoughts. Time to feel your own feelings. Time to discover your own values. Time to become who you really are. And that time is not wasted. It's sacred. It's necessary. It's the work of becoming human at the highest levels of development. So withdraw when you need to. Be alone without apology. Protect your solitude as the precious resource it is, because your development matters. Your authenticity matters. Your journey toward full humanness matters. And society will benefit far more from your authentic presence, even if rare, than from your constant performance of acceptable conformity. This is what Maslow discovered. This is what his research revealed. And this is what highly developed people throughout history have always known. That sometimes the most socially valuable thing you can do is to temporarily withdraw from society, to go deep, to do the work, to become real. And then, when you return, you bring something back that the world desperately needs. Not more noise, not more performance, but genuine presence, authentic wisdom, real development. This is the gift of solitude. This is the necessity of withdrawal. This is why highly developed people slowly step back from society. Not because they're leaving, but because they're becoming. Not because they hate the world, but because they love truth more than acceptance. And in that choice, in that brave choice to honor developmental needs over social expectations, they become the very thing society most needs: fully developed human beings, living authentically, contributing genuinely, from a place of wholeness rather than deficiency. This is Maslow's message. This is his gift to anyone feeling the pull to withdraw. You're not broken. You're becoming. And your solitude is not selfish. It's sacred. Honor it. Protect it. Use it for the profound work of becoming fully, authentically, courageously yourself, because that's what self-actualization requires. And that's what the world, whether it knows it or not, desperately needs.